They were remembered as gods who came down from the sky, carrying with them knowledge and powers that seemed impossible for the people of the ancient world to explain. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. In the pages of the Bible, their shadows reappear under different names: the Watchers, or the giants born from unions between heaven and earth. Across thousands of years, civilizations in every corner of the globe preserved fragments of the same haunting story. Beings who were not entirely of this world, yet who shaped the destiny of humankind. What makes the tale even more unsettling is not just the mythic past, but the suggestion that their legacy never truly disappeared. Could their blood still run quietly through the veins of certain people alive today? Could the great dynasties of kings, priests, and modern leaders be heirs to an ancient pact, a bond forged between humanity and visitors from the stars? This journey will lead us through myth, archaeology, and the strange whispers of modern encounters, piecing together a mystery that refuses to stay buried. Welcome to Deformed History. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now. I love seeing our little map of Watchers light up around the world. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates was not only fertile with grain, but fertile with memory, a place where humanity first scratched its story into clay. Imagine the Sumerians, more than 6,000 years ago, bending over damp tablets, pressing lines and wedges that would harden into the earliest writing we know. What they chose to record was not simply trade or harvest counts, but the presence of beings they called the Anunnaki. To their minds, these were not symbols, not vague forces of nature, but figures of power that walked beside them. The word itself means those from Anu, with Anu being the sky god who embodied the very vault of heaven, and Ki, the earth goddess who anchored life. Their union, according to these ancient tales, birthed a pantheon that refused to remain distant. Unlike the cold stars above, the Anunnaki crossed down into human fields and streets. They were imagined with roles as concrete as rain and river, judgment and breath. Enlil, one of the most commanding, ruled the air and was believed to hold the authority of law. Enki, his brother, represented wisdom and invention, the one who shaped waterways that allowed wheat to grow where desert might have reigned. In stories, he was the guide, turning chaos into order, teaching humankind how to survive the punishing sun by channeling the rivers into canals. The ziggurats that rose from the plain were more than monuments. These stepped towers, massive brick structures, were described as ladders binding heaven and earth, places where mortals and divine could meet. When priests climbed their heights with offerings, they believed they were bridging two worlds. To the people who built them, these temples were as necessary as irrigation ditches, for they promised balance with forces larger than themselves. And inside these temples, clay tablets told that writing itself had been bestowed by the Anunnaki, alongside the secrets of numbers, medicine, and the art of construction. Civilized life was not claimed as invention of mortals, but as a gift, a transmission from neighbors who descended out of the sky. Picture Eridu or Uruk, cities that the legends said were founded under divine supervision, bustling with activity, ruled by kings who were seen not as mere men, but as mediators with the gods. To the Sumerian farmer, to disobey those rulers was not only rebellion against a crown, but defiance against the very order of the cosmos. In such a world, obedience meant survival, for power was embodied in forms too great to challenge. Yet for us today, the question arises, were these stories poetry alone, metaphors woven to explain storms and harvests, or were they memories of actual encounters framed in the only language early humanity possessed? The tablets speak with precision, listing names, genealogies, and rivalries, as though recording biographies rather than inventing legends. The detail suggests more than dream. It suggests recollection. Across time, the shadow of the Anunnaki traveled far. Even when empires fell, echoes of gods who once walked the earth reappeared in other lands under other names. The Egyptians claimed descent from Ra, the Japanese emperors from the sun goddess Amaterasu, and in Mesoamerica, rulers traced bloodlines back to celestial beings. Everywhere, the suggestion lingered that human authority was sanctified not by vote or conquest alone, but by kinship with powers that were not entirely human. In the silence of Mesopotamian nights, as fires flickered against mud-brick walls, the people must have whispered about who these beings really were. Some imagined them seated on thrones of lapis lazuli in heavenly courts. Others may have seen them striding through their very streets, cloaked not in light but in dust, wielding knowledge that no mortal hand could invent. The idea that civilization itself was planted like a seed by strangers from the sky unsettles the notion that humanity rose alone. It suggests we may have been apprentices, guided step by step. And if that is so, what became of those teachers? Did they vanish, ascending back to stars? Or did they weave themselves into our blood, leaving traces that still flow through us today? These questions are what propel us into this exploration. The Sumerians may not have known they were preserving clues for future ages, but when they etched into clay the names of An, Kai, Enlil, Enki, and the countless descendants of the heavens, they carved not only religion, but mystery. Their world was not a separation of divine and human. It was a mingling. To live in those first cities was to inhabit a reality where the gods were not absent but present, instructing, judging, gifting, and sometimes punishing. As we retrace their stories, what we uncover is not only the birth of writing and law, but the possibility that humanity's very existence is intertwined with something, or someone, not of this earth. It is in this space between dust and sky, between myth and record, that our journey through the legacy of the Anunnaki begins. Centuries after the Sumerians pressed their wedge-shaped signs into clay, the tablets lay buried in the soil of Mesopotamia, waiting for someone to read them again. When archaeologists in the 19th century began unearthing these fragments, they did not expect to find stories of sky gods or strange genealogies, yet there they were. Myths and chronicles that hinted at origins larger than the earth itself. For most scholars, these accounts were dismissed as symbolic tales, imaginative efforts of an early people to explain the world around them. But in the 20th century, one man chose to take them literally. His name was Zechariah Sitchin, and his interpretation would ignite a modern wave of fascination and controversy. Sitchin was not satisfied with treating cuneiform texts as allegories. He believed that when the Sumerians described the Anunnaki descending from the sky, they were recording actual encounters. In his books published during the 1970s, he pieced together lines of script and claimed they told the story of travelers from a world beyond ours. According to him, these were not spiritual beings, but extraterrestrial visitors from a planet he named Nibiru. Unlike the familiar planets circling close to the Sun, Nibiru was said to follow an elongated path, sweeping near Earth only once every 3,600 years. To Sitchin, the epic cycles of destruction and renewal in human memory were echoes of this recurring passage. He argued that the Anunnaki came to Earth not for worship, but for resources, particularly gold, which he suggested they required to stabilize their planet's atmosphere. Gold, malleable and resistant to corrosion, could be ground into fine particles to create a reflective shield, a solution Sitchin imagined advanced beings might employ. If true, the glimmering metal sought so eagerly by human kings was first valued for cosmic survival. The story did not stop there. Mining in the hot soils of Mesopotamia was grueling, even for gods. And so, Sitchin claimed, the Anunnaki turned to experimentation. In the texts, he read descriptions of clay being shaped, failed prototypes, and eventual success. He interpreted these not as metaphors of pottery, but as records of genetic engineering. In this view, the Anunnaki selected a primitive hominid that roamed the earth, combined their own essence with it, and produced a new creature capable of both labor and obedience. That creature was us. Within a place he identified as the House of Creation, perhaps a laboratory of sorts, the goddess Ninhursag and the wise Enki labored to mold life. When the tablet spoke of forming a being from clay, Sitchin suggested the word clay stood for biological material, flesh, cells, DNA. Early attempts failed, producing beings that could not speak or survive. But finally one prototype succeeded. Adamu, a name that resonates uncannily with Adam in biblical tradition. This being could understand, reproduce, and multiply. Humanity, then, according to Sitchin, was not born but made, shaped to be workers in the mines and fields of the Anunnaki. He pointed to passages describing toil in a place called Abzu, which he identified with Africa, rich in minerals. Over time, these new humans learned from their makers, receiving the arts of agriculture, calendars, and writing not by discovery, but by instruction. Civilization itself, Sitchin insisted, was an inheritance, not an invention. To most academics, these claims were outrageous, a distortion of ancient texts to fit science fiction. But to many readers, they struck a chord. They explained why human culture seemed to leap forward in sudden bursts rather than crawl gradually. They accounted for myths across cultures that spoke of gods teaching laws, mathematics, and astronomy. And they posed a question that lingers like smoke. If the Anunnaki shaped us, then part of them remains within us. This thought unsettled the borders between past and present. Were the Sumerians preserving the memory of visitors from the stars? Or were modern minds simply overlaying advanced fantasies onto ancient clay? Critics dismissed Sitchin for mistranslations, for leaps unsupported by the text. Yet even critics could not erase the public hunger for such a narrative. His books sold millions, translated into multiple languages, giving birth to a movement that thrives still. In the story he offered, humanity is both diminished and elevated. Diminished because we are not purely self-created, elevated because our ancestry might reach the stars. Consider what it means if even a fragment of this is true. The very shape of our hands, the capacity of our minds, could be echoes of an ancient project. Our myths of Eden, of gods walking in gardens, of forbidden knowledge and expulsion, might be distorted recollections of that experiment. The longing to return to a golden age could be, in this view, a memory coded in our blood. For those who read Sitchin with belief, the Anunnaki are not gone. Their legacy flows through kings and leaders, their knowledge flickers in our science, and their cycles return whenever Nibiru swings near again. The question then becomes not only who we are, but who still walks beside us, hidden in plain sight. As night falls over the ruins of Sumer, as the stars appear above the empty plains, one can almost imagine distant travelers watching, waiting for the moment when their path brings them close once more. If Sitchin's reading of the clay tablets is even partly correct, then humanity was not simply molded to labor, but also entwined with the blood of its creators. In the myths of Sumer, there appear figures who were more than human, yet not entirely divine, rulers who bore within them a fraction of the sky itself. Among the most famous is Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, whose story survives in the oldest epic poem known. He was described not as ordinary flesh, but as 2/3 god and 1/3 man. His mother, the goddess Ninsun, was said to have given him wisdom, while his mortal father gave him ambition and desire. This ratio of divinity and humanity fascinated later generations, for it suggested an arithmetic of bloodlines, as though the degree of celestial essence could be measured and passed on. Gilgamesh's adventures, from slaying monsters to seeking immortality, reflect not only the yearnings of a king, but the restless inheritance of someone born between two worlds. The notion that some leaders were literally the offspring of the Anunnaki is woven throughout ancient texts. Titles such as Son of Anu or Chosen by Enlil may sound like metaphors to us, but to those who lived in Mesopotamia, they were declarations of blood. These rulers were believed to carry the spark of heaven in their veins, a spark that justified their rule not by conquest, but by lineage. This idea spread far beyond Sumer. In Egypt, pharaohs claimed descent from Ra, the sun god, and considered themselves intermediaries between the mortal and divine. In Japan, emperors traced their origin to Amaterasu, the radiant goddess of the sun. In the cities of Mesoamerica, kings were celebrated as descendants of celestial visitors who once descended to guide their people. Everywhere the same pattern emerges, authority sanctified by divine ancestry. To imagine what this meant for ordinary people is to imagine living under rulers whose very bodies were considered proof of cosmic order. Their authority was not subject to question, for it was encoded in blood. And the preservation of that blood became a sacred duty. Across the centuries, royal families married within narrow circles, ensuring that the line of divinity remained intact. The politics of alliance, the tragedies of arranged marriages, and the wars of succession may all have been driven not only by human ambition, but by the hidden urgency to preserve a spark believed to originate from the stars. In this light, history itself can be read as the struggle to maintain a genetic inheritance. But how could such claims be more than myth? The tablets that name Gilgamesh or declare kings as sons of gods leave open the possibility that intermingling between human and Anunnaki was not merely symbolic. If the Anunnaki had altered our very DNA to create workers, then what prevented them from mingling with their creations, shaping hybrids who stood taller, thought sharper, lived longer? These hybrids could have ruled as kings, priests, or prophets, carrying authority not only from charisma, but from genetic difference. Some legends describe them as possessing extraordinary strength. others as wise beyond measure, still others as burdened by arrogance that no mortal could restrain. Gilgamesh embodies this contradiction, restless, unsatisfied, endlessly seeking the secret of eternal life. His failure to grasp it echoes a truth. To be born between divine and human was to be torn between immortality and death, power and vulnerability. The fascination with half-divine rulers lingers in every tradition. In Greek myth, Heracles was born of Zeus and a mortal woman, his feats remembered as superhuman. In the Bible, mighty men of old were said to be born when the sons of God came to the daughters of men. The pattern repeats as though scattered cultures were preserving fragments of one great story. For those who view these accounts through Sitchin's lens, they are not independent inventions, but shared memory of a time when celestial blood flowed into human lines. Imagine the coronation of a Sumerian king, the crowd gathering before a ziggurat, priests declaring him a son of heaven. The people would not have seen this as political theater, but as the confirmation of divine continuity. The king's veins, they believed, carried more than human blood. They carried the mandate of beings who once descended on wings of fire. This conviction could inspire obedience, reverence, and fear. And as centuries passed, it could also inspire secrecy, as dynasties guarded their inheritance from dilution. To preserve the spark, rulers intermarried, weaving webs of kinship that stretched across continents. In medieval Europe, noble houses bound themselves through generations of cousin marriages, a practice often explained as political strategy, but perhaps also reflecting the deeper instinct to keep sacred blood pure. The idea of blue blood, which became a common phrase for nobility, may hold echoes of something far older. If the elites of every age believed they carried within them the essence of gods, then to mingle with common stock was to risk losing what made them extraordinary. Whether these beliefs were rooted in truth or illusion, they shaped the destiny of nations. Wars were fought, treaties signed, and empires forged to defend bloodlines. And behind this, perhaps, lingered the silent influence of the Anunnaki, their legacy guiding human affairs long after their presence faded from sight. The story of Gilgamesh is not only an epic of adventure, but a mirror of this hidden narrative. His arrogance, his strength, his quest for immortality reflect the paradox of hybrid rulers. They are elevated yet doomed, superior yet flawed, forever searching for what lies beyond the reach of human hands. As we follow his footsteps, we are reminded that the question of ancestry is not only about the past. If divine bloodlines once shaped kings and queens, then traces may remain even now, hidden within families that still command power. The mystery of who truly rules us begins here, with the half-divine kings of Sumer and the belief that heaven once mingled with earth. If the rulers of ancient Sumer carried within them the spark of heaven, then one might expect some trace to remain even now, hidden not only in stories, but in blood itself. Modern science, which maps the body with microscopes and tests, may seem far removed from the dusty tablets of Mesopotamia. Yet sometimes it offers clues that feel eerily aligned with the oldest myths. Among these is the enigma of Rh-negative blood. Most of humanity, about 85%, carries a protein on the surface of red blood cells known as the Rh factor, named after the rhesus monkey in which it was first studied. For these individuals, transfusions are relatively straightforward. But for those born without the protein, the Rh-negative minority, biology behaves strangely. If an Rh-negative mother carries an Rh-positive child, her body may attack the fetus as if it were an intruder. Only with modern medicine can such pregnancies be safely managed. In earlier centuries, the result was often tragedy. This biological incompatibility raises unsettling questions. If all humans descended from a common origin, why should one group carry blood that reacts violently to another? Why should a simple protein divide humanity in such a fundamental way? Some researchers suggest it points to a divergence deep in our past, a fork in the genetic path that ordinary evolution does not fully explain. And here is where myth and biology meet. For some theorists, Rh-negative blood is not a random mutation, but a legacy of mixing between human and something other. If the Anunnaki altered our species, or if they mingled directly with us, the absence of this protein might be the residue of their genes, incompatible with our own yet preserved through generations. The mystery grows sharper when we consider geography. Rh-negative blood is distributed unevenly across the world. It is rare in Asia and Africa, almost absent in the Americas before European contact, but strikingly common in Europe. And in one corner of Europe, the concentration rises far above the global average. In the Pyrenees Mountains, between France and Spain, lives a people known as the Basques. Their language, Euskara, has no clear relation to any other tongue. It does not descend from Latin, nor does it resemble Celtic or Germanic speech. It stands alone, as though it grew from a root separate from its neighbors. Their customs are old, their origins mysterious, and their blood distinct. Up to 35% of Basques are Rh-negative, more than double the proportion found elsewhere. To some, this anomaly is coincidence, a quirk of isolation. To others, it is a genetic beacon, pointing back to an inheritance unlike that of surrounding populations. Theories abound. One of the most captivating links the Basques to the legend of Atlantis, that fabled civilization described by Plato as advanced and powerful, later swallowed by the sea. If survivors of such a catastrophe fled across the world, they may have carried both knowledge and genes unlike any other. Settling in the Pyrenees, they preserved a heritage older than Europe itself. In this telling, the Basques are the last living descendants of an Atlantean world, a world that might itself have been shaped by teachers from the stars. Atlantis and the Anunnaki, two names from distant traditions, become entwined in speculation. If the Anunnaki once shared their wisdom with early humanity, perhaps they also guided Atlantis. And when that island fell, the refugees bore away not only memory, but blood. Modern science has tried to trace Rh-negative blood to a mutation, but the question lingers. Why here? Why so concentrated and why so hostile in its incompatibility? It is tempting to imagine that it is less a mutation and more a marker, a silent testimony carried in veins that something other once walked among us. For those who hold this view, the Basque shepherds tending flocks in high valleys are not only descendants of mountain ancestors, but the last visible strand of a cosmic inheritance. Their language, unlike any other, becomes the echo of voices from a forgotten age. Their blood, rare and distinct, becomes the signature of a union between human and divine. This speculation grows stronger when combined with the pattern of rulers guarding their bloodlines. If power was believed to rest in celestial inheritance, then perhaps the spread of Rh-negative blood among European nobility is no accident. Intermarriage preserved not only titles, but a genetic distinction. The phrase blue blood may, in this view, be less metaphorical than we assume. The veins of kings and queens, guarded so carefully, may have carried not simply human lineage, but something older, stranger, remembered in myth as the children of Anu. Yet even beyond Europe, stories surface of lineages touched by the sky. In South America, legends tell of Viracocha, a god who came from across the sea, tall and fair, teaching arts and laws before departing. In the Pacific, stories speak of visitors who descended in blazing chariots, leaving behind new knowledge. Wherever one looks, the same suggestion recurs. Humanity was not alone in its early steps. If blood remembers, then perhaps it remembers more than we realize. The enigma of Rh-negative blood may be dismissed by science as anomaly, but to those who look for patterns in myth and biology, it is evidence that the past still flows in our veins. When we hold these threads together, the Basque language, the Atlantis myth, the survival of rare bloodlines, we begin to see not random chance, but the outline of an ancient design. Whether we call them Anunnaki, Atlanteans, or visitors from the heavens, the suggestion is the same. Something foreign mingled with us, leaving behind not only cities and laws, but the very substance of life. And in the quiet mountains of Europe, in the veins of shepherds and nobles alike, that inheritance may still endure. The story of hidden bloodlines might have remained within the dusty pages of ancient myth and the rare markers of modern biology, but in the late 20th century, it was revived in a startling new form. A British writer named David Icke stepped onto the stage of alternative history and presented a theory that shocked even those who were already familiar with the Anunnaki. For him, the ancient gods were not only advanced beings from another planet, but reptilian in nature, shape-shifting creatures from a distant star system known as Alpha Draconis. According to Icke, these beings arrived thousands of years ago and established a base of power on Earth. They did not reveal themselves openly, but moved in shadows, constructing networks of influence that would endure across millennia. To survive and control, they needed to blend into human society, and so they created bloodlines, hybrid families born from unions between human and reptilian. These families, he claimed, were placed into positions of authority in ancient kingdoms. Pharaohs, emperors, and kings carried not only crowns, but genes that tied them to the Anunnaki. Over centuries, these bloodlines spread, entwining themselves with dynasties and noble houses. In modern times, Icke argued, they still hold the reins of power. Presidents, prime ministers, bankers, and royalty are, in his view, descendants of this ancient hybrid lineage. The phrase blue blood is no longer metaphorical, but literal, pointing to a biological inheritance guarded through generations. He saw the British royal family, American political dynasties, and wealthy banking clans not as ordinary elites, but as branches of the same root, stretching back to Alpha Draconis. For Icke, the significance of this bloodline was not only symbolic. He described it as the framework of a global control network, an invisible architecture that directs human history. Wars, revolutions, financial collapses, and even epidemics, he interpreted them as carefully orchestrated events designed to maintain humanity in a state of division and fear. Fear, he said, was not only a tool of control, but a source of sustenance. These reptilian beings, in his telling, fed on the energy of human conflict, thriving on chaos. To many, such claims sounded absurd, closer to fantasy than history. Yet Ikki's lectures filled halls across continents. He pointed to recurring symbols, ancient emblems reused by secret societies, the concentration of power in a handful of families, and the uncanny persistence of dynasties that seemed untouchable. His vision was that of a long conspiracy, stretching from the ziggurats of Sumer to the boardrooms of modern corporations. Central to this theory was the idea of shape-shifting. Ikki claimed that while these reptilian beings normally appeared human, under stress or in specific conditions their true form could flicker through. Witnesses, he argued, had described strange shifts in the eyes or skin of public figures, glimpses of a hidden reality concealed beneath a facade. Stories of such sightings circulated widely, fueling a mythology that blurred the line between political critique and cosmic horror. Critics ridiculed Ikki, dismissing his claims as paranoia dressed in myth. Yet ridicule did not stop his influence. His books sold widely, his talks drew audiences in dozens of countries, and his ideas wove into the fabric of modern conspiracy culture. What struck many was not only the reptilian imagery, but the underlying suggestion that power is inherited, guarded, and manipulated in ways hidden from the ordinary citizen. And in this, his theory resonates with older traditions. The Bible speaks of the Nephilim, mighty men of renown, born when sons of God mingled with daughters of men. Sumerian texts describe kings as sons of Anu. Legends across the world tell of rulers descending from celestial beings. Whether reptilian or divine, the message is the same. Those in power are not like us. They stand apart, touched by forces outside ordinary humanity. Ikki pushed the idea to its extreme, rooting it not in heaven, but in Alpha Draconis, a constellation visible in the northern sky, associated in some traditions with serpents and dragons. From there, he said, came the architects of our hidden enslavement. They established a center on Earth that ancient Sumerians remembered as Din, the abode of the righteous ones, later transformed in biblical tradition into the Garden of Eden. From this place, the reptilian Anunnaki began their mingling with humankind, creating hybrid lines that would rule. For Ikki, history is not a tale of nations rising and falling, but of one lineage manipulating the rest, generation after generation. If his claims seem outlandish, it is because they invert the comfort of ordinary history. Instead of progress, he presents control. Instead of accident, he presents design. And instead of equality, he presents hierarchy inscribed in blood. To walk through this theory is to enter a world where every emblem, every handshake between leaders, every symbol carved into stone conceals a deeper meaning. For believers, the evidence is everywhere once you begin to look. For skeptics, it is the human tendency to weave patterns where none exist. But either way, the fascination remains. The possibility that our rulers are not only figuratively cold-blooded, but literally reptilian captures imagination because it echoes the oldest suspicion humanity has carried, that those in power are not like us, that they are something other. As we stand in the shadow of these stories, whether carved in clay tablets or shouted in modern halls, we confront the same unsettling thought. If the Anunnaki, or their reptilian heirs, never left, then history is not our own. It is theirs, and we are still playing in a theater designed long before we knew the script. When we turn from Sumerian tablets and modern conspiracies to the pages of the Bible, we find a narrative that feels eerily parallel. In the book of Genesis, chapter 6, there is a passage brief but haunting. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men of old, men of renown. For generations, this verse has puzzled theologians, dismissed by some as metaphor, embraced by others as literal history. Who were these sons of God? And who were the giants, the Nephilim, born from their unions? To the faithful they were fallen angels, heavenly beings who crossed a boundary never meant to be crossed. To those who read Sumerian myth alongside Scripture, the connection seems unavoidable. The sons of God may have been the same beings the Sumerians called Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens and mingled with human women, producing a generation neither fully divine nor fully mortal. The Nephilim are described as beings of enormous size and strength, violent and feared. Their presence fills the earth with corruption, according to the biblical story, prompting God to unleash the great flood. In this way, the flood becomes more than a punishment for human sin. It is a cleansing of the hybrid bloodlines, an attempt to reset creation by sweeping away those who blurred the line between heaven and earth. Yet the Bible's own words complicate the tale. And also, after that, it says, suggesting that even after the flood, some of these beings survived, or returned. Later books describe tribes of giants that the Israelites encountered when they entered the land of Canaan. The Anakim, towering people who dwelled in fortified cities, were said to descend from the Nephilim. The Israelite spies, returning with fear, exclaimed that beside them they felt like grasshoppers. Other names appear: the Rephaim, the Amim, the Zuzim, the Zamzumim. Each group is described as larger, mightier, more fearsome than ordinary men, inhabiting stone cities and sleeping on enormous beds. These names may seem obscure to modern readers, but to the ancients they were reminders that the age of giants was not mere legend but living memory. Consider the Philistine warrior Goliath, whose height is recorded at over 9 feet, his armor so heavy that few ordinary men could lift it. To many he was not just a tall soldier, but a descendant of that older bloodline, a final echo of the Nephilim walking the earth. If so, then the flood did not erase them entirely. They endured, diminished but present, woven into the ancestry of tribes and rulers. In this perspective, the Bible and Sumerian tablets tell the same story through different languages, a time when celestial beings came down, mingled with humans, and left behind children who were larger, stronger, more arrogant than those around them. Their existence was both marvel and threat, admired for their might, yet feared for their violence. For some interpreters, these hybrid beings explain the recurring myth of demigods across cultures. Hercules in Greece, born of Zeus and a mortal woman. Gilgamesh in Sumer, 2/3 divine. The heroes of Mesoamerica, said to descend from sky gods. Everywhere the same pattern surfaces. Unions between the divine and human produce extraordinary figures, celebrated yet tragic. And just as in the Sumerian epic, these figures often seek immortality, as though aware of their fragile position between eternity and death. To imagine the Nephilim is to imagine beings whose very bodies were proof of transgression, living monuments to a mixing that was forbidden. Their size, their violence, their arrogance embodied the danger of crossing cosmic boundaries. In the worldview of the ancients, they destabilized the balance of creation. This is why the flood narrative resonates so deeply. It is not only about water and destruction, it is about restoring separation between heaven and earth, between mortal and divine. Yet the persistence of giant tribes after the flood raises questions. Did some survive in hidden places? Did the Anunnaki return to repeat their unions? Or is the Bible acknowledging that the attempt to erase them could never be complete? For those who trace these threads into the present, the implication is clear. The legacy of the Nephilim may still run quietly in human veins, not as towering warriors, perhaps, but as unusual strength, intelligence, or difference. Certain families, certain lines of rulers and priests may carry fragments of that hybrid past. When read this way, history becomes a battlefield of bloodlines, with humanity itself shaped by forces we only partly understand. The Israelites believed they were commanded to drive out or destroy the Anakim and Rephaim, seeing them as obstacles to a promised inheritance. Yet their memory persisted, haunting the texts. Even as they were defeated or scattered, whispers remained of giants who had once walked among men, reminders that the boundary between heaven and earth had been crossed before and could be crossed again. For us, reading across millennia, the parallels between Sumerian gods and biblical Nephilim create a picture at once mysterious and unsettling. It suggests that myths separated by culture and distance may all be fragments of a larger truth. Whether we call them Anunnaki, sons of God, or Nephilim, the pattern is the same. Beings from beyond mingled with humanity, leaving behind a legacy that both fascinated and terrified. And if such beings once lived, then perhaps their descendants still do, hidden not in caves or ruins, but in bloodlines that endure quietly, waiting for recognition. When the waters of the flood receded, the world was meant to be cleansed, a fresh beginning where the boundary between heaven and earth was restored. Yet the biblical texts whisper that the story did not end so neatly. In the hills of Canaan, in the fortified cities perched on rocky ridges, there remained tribes whose very presence terrified those who encountered them. The Anakim, described as descendants of the Nephilim, were so large that Israelite spies sent by Moses reported feeling like grasshoppers in comparison. These were not vague phantoms, but adversaries faced in battle, remembered in records as tangible, living giants. Alongside them were the Rephaim, whose name became almost synonymous with the mighty dead, a people of great stature who occupied Bashan and other highlands. Some accounts describe their king, Og of Bashan, as sleeping in a bed of iron over 13 feet long, a detail preserved not as metaphor, but as measurement, carved into memory as proof of size. The Emim, the Zuzim, the Zamzumim, names nearly lost to us now, were likewise described as powerful and enormous, haunting the valleys and plains of the Levant. To the Israelites who chronicled these encounters, they were obstacles placed in the path to the Promised Land, enemies that had to be driven out. Yet beneath the surface of conquest is another story, the persistence of a bloodline thought to be erased by the flood. If even after the cleansing waters the Anakim and Rephaim walked the earth, then either the Nephilim survived hidden or the Anunnaki returned to repeat their unions. In either case, the hybrid inheritance endured. The most famous of these echoes appears centuries later in the Philistine city of Goth. There, a warrior named Goliath strode into the valley, clad in armor heavy enough to crush ordinary men, wielding a spear like a weaver's beam. The biblical description of his height, more than 9 feet, may sound exaggerated, yet when placed alongside the accounts of Anakim and Rephaim, it feels like continuity rather than fantasy. David's victory over him with a sling stone is celebrated as a triumph of faith over brute force, but beneath the moral tale is a memory of confronting the last of the giants. What is striking is not only that these beings appear in sacred texts, but that they appear across cultures. In Greek myth, the Gigantes fought the Olympian gods. In Norse sagas, Jotnar roamed the icy wastes. In the Americas, indigenous peoples told of red-haired giants who once ruled the land. Everywhere, stories of outsized figures loom, feared and revered, reminders that humanity once walked beside something larger. To dismiss them all as coincidence is tempting, yet the consistency gnaws at the imagination. Could they all be memories of the same phenomenon, refracted through different languages and traditions? If so, then perhaps the ancient bloodlines did not vanish but scattered, diluted through generations, yet leaving traces. Not every descendant would tower above others. Inheritance is uneven, traits appear and fade. But certain families may have preserved more of that legacy than others. Strength beyond ordinary measure, unusual longevity, even a charisma that bends nations. These could be subtle manifestations of what the ancients once called divine blood. When medieval chroniclers spoke of kings with extraordinary vigor, when folk tales praised heroes who seemed more than human, perhaps they were noting the flicker of an old inheritance. In this light, the survival of giant tribes into the era of Israelite conquest is not anomaly, but inevitability. Blood does not vanish in a single generation. It lingers, blending, resurfacing in unexpected places. And the obsession of rulers with preserving their lines, marrying within narrow circles, may reflect more than politics. It may be the echo of an ancient command: guard the spark, do not let it fade. For the Israelites, confronting the Anakim and Rephaim was both military and spiritual. To defeat them was to reclaim purity, to assert that humanity belonged to God alone, not to the mingled offspring of heaven and earth. Yet the very effort to erase them testifies to their reality. One does not fear shadows with such intensity. One fears adversaries of flesh and bone. The ruins of Canaan's high cities, the memory of beds too large for mortals, the names of tribes etched into scripture, all these stand as faint yet stubborn evidence. And so the question lingers. If they survived then, what prevents them from surviving now? Not as towering giants, perhaps, but as men and women carrying within their cells the residue of that mingling. In the faces of leaders who rise effortlessly, in athletes whose strength seems beyond training, in minds that grasp with uncanny brilliance, some see the distant echo of the Nephilim. Perhaps what was once obvious in stature has become subtle in form, hidden in traits we cannot easily measure. Bloodlines adapt, but they endure. To walk through the ancient hills of Canaan today is to see ruins and stones, but beneath them lies the memory of battles fought against beings larger than life. And in that memory lies the suggestion that humanity has never been entirely alone, that from our earliest steps we have lived beside others who were not quite us. Whether we call them Anakim, Rephaim, or simply giants, their story is the same. The persistence of a forbidden inheritance, the survival of a bloodline that was meant to be destroyed yet endures, pulsing quietly through the veins of history. As if the stories of the Anakim and Rephaim were not strange enough, whispers of giants do not remain locked in the pages of ancient scripture. They surface again in the modern world, in reports that seem too bizarre to fit the rational age yet refuse to vanish. Among the most famous is the tale of the giant of Kandahar. In 2002, deep in the mountains of Afghanistan, a U.S. military patrol stumbled upon a cave while searching for missing comrades. According to accounts shared later by soldiers, what emerged from the shadows was a being out of myth. A humanoid figure, more than 12 feet tall, with skin pale as bone, hair the color of fire, and 6 fingers on each hand. It wielded a weapon as large as a telephone pole, moving with speed that seemed impossible for its size. The encounter was brief and brutal. One soldier was killed almost instantly. The others opened fire with rifles, machine guns, even grenades, yet the giant advanced until sheer force of bullets finally brought it down. Before the men could study the body, a helicopter arrived, carried the corpse away, and sealed the event in silence. Official reports never acknowledged it, yet the soldiers who survived never forgot. Interviews years later echoed with their disbelief. They had killed a giant, and the world would never know. The Kandahar tale may sound like rumor, yet it aligns uncannily with ancient descriptions. Pale skin, fiery hair, extra digits. These features recall myths from the Middle East and beyond, where giants were marked as different from ordinary men. The speed and ferocity of the attack echo stories of the Nephilim's violence. Even the secrecy of the aftermath feels like a continuation of history. Knowledge of giants has always been dangerous, always hidden. Across the ocean, in the deserts of Nevada, another discovery points the same direction. In 1911, miners digging in Lovelock Cave for bat guano stumbled on remains that did not fit expectations. They found sandals over 15 inches long, tools suited for hands far larger than human, and bones measuring 8 to 10 feet in height. Most striking were skulls, with red hair still clinging to them, preserved by the dry cave air. Local Paiute tribes had long told stories of the Siteka, a race of violent red-haired giants who once roamed the region, fought against their ancestors, and were eventually driven into caves and burned alive. For archaeologists, the finds were puzzling. Some bones disappeared into private collections, others were explained away as anomalies, yet the memory lingered. Red-haired giants in America, described by tribes long before European contact, echoed legends of giants elsewhere in the world. Science insisted on natural explanations, but the pattern of myth and bone suggested otherwise. Skeptics claim the red hair is simply a result of time and soil, dark pigments leached until strands appear lighter. But across continents, stories of giants with hair of fire surface again and again. Could every culture invent the same image, or are they remembering the same reality? Beyond these famous examples lie countless smaller accounts. Farmers in South America claim to have unearthed oversized skeletons while plowing fields. In the mountains of Asia, rumors persist of enormous footprints preserved in stone. In the archives of explorers, reports appear of tribes meeting beings twice their size. Each alone may be dismissed. Together they form a mosaic too consistent to ignore. What binds Kandahar and Lovelock, Afghanistan and Nevada, is not only the size of the beings, but the secrecy that follows. Stories vanish from headlines, evidence disappears, and those who speak are ridiculed. Yet whispers endure because they resonate with what our oldest stories already told us. Giants once lived among us, and perhaps still do. If the Anunnaki mingled with humanity, if the Nephilim survived the flood, then occasional appearances of their descendants are not impossible. Instead of towering empires, they exist as isolated remnants, hidden in mountains, caves, deserts. When soldiers stumble upon them, when miners uncover their bones, the encounters are shocking but not unprecedented. They are fragments of a long continuity, proof that history is stranger than textbooks admit. For those who believe, the suppression of such discoveries is deliberate. Just as ancient rulers guarded their bloodlines, modern powers may guard the knowledge that humanity is not alone. To reveal giants would be to reveal the truth of our past, to admit that myths were not fables but records, and to admit that would unravel the story we tell ourselves about who we are. Walking into Lovelock Cave today, one sees only rock walls and dust, but if one listens, the silence is heavy with memory. Standing in the mountains of Kandahar, the wind carries more than sand. It carries the echo of something enormous moving unseen. These places remind us that the boundary between legend and fact is thin, and that perhaps the Anunnaki, or their descendants, never truly left. They linger at the edges, emerging when least expected, reminders that humanity's story is shared with others whose presence defies our categories. To ignore them is easy, but to consider them is to reopen a door sealed since the days of Sumer. And once opened, it cannot be closed again. The deserts of Nevada and the mountains of Afghanistan are not the only places where echoes of giants remain. Across the vast expanse of the Americas, stories persist that speak of people larger than life, figures woven into the memory of indigenous tribes long before European arrival. In the dusty canyons of the Southwest, the Paiute people told of battles with the Site Ka, a race of red-haired giants who lived in caves, emerging to raid and terrorize. The story of Lovelock Cave fits into this tradition, not as anomaly, but as confirmation of tales repeated around fires for generations. In the plains of the Midwest, tribes spoke of skeletal remains uncovered from burial mounds, bones longer than any man. Early settlers reported discovering skulls of unusual size, sometimes dismissed by later historians as exaggeration, yet consistent enough to form a pattern. In South America, the echoes are just as clear. The Moche of Peru carved images of warriors towering above ordinary men, their size exaggerated perhaps, yet hinting at a memory of actual disparity. Spanish chroniclers arriving in the Andes heard tales of giants who came by sea, taller and stronger than the local people, some described as cruel conquerors who built structures too massive for human hands alone. On Easter Island in the Pacific, far from continental shores, the Moai statues stand silent, their colossal heads gazing skyward. Local legends speak of long ears and short ears, rival groups, one said to be much taller, responsible for moving the massive stone figures across the island. To this day, archaeologists puzzle over how such feats were accomplished with limited tools, but within the oral histories, the answer is simple. Giants lived here once, and their strength was unmatched. Farther north, in the forests of Canada, tales of Sasquatch overlap with memories of giant tribes, not only hairy wilderness beings, but people who stood well above the height of their neighbors. these stories blur into what we call cryptids, but for the tribes who preserve them, they are not fantasy. They are history, whispered down through elders. Even in Mesoamerica, where civilizations like the Aztec and Maya flourished, there are records of Quinametsin, a race of giants who lived in the previous age of the world, destroyed by catastrophe. According to Nahua legends, these beings built the great cities before the age of humans, their ruins still standing as testimony. When the Spaniards entered Mexico and saw pyramids rising like mountains, some natives explained that they were not made by ordinary men, but by giants who came before. The consistency across continents is staggering. Whether in the caves of Nevada, the mountains of Peru, the islands of Polynesia, or the forests of North America, indigenous peoples speak of those who were taller, stronger, and often more violent. Some were teachers, others oppressors, but all were remembered as different. To imagine that each culture invented giants independently is possible, but to consider that they were all remembering encounters with the same kind of beings is more compelling. And if we link these memories to the Nephilim and Anunnaki, the web grows tighter. Could it be that after the flood, the hybrid bloodlines scattered, traveling across oceans, establishing themselves in far lands? If so, then the Americas were not untouched by this inheritance. Archaeological anomalies feed the speculation. Massive stone blocks in South America, cut with precision that even modern tools struggle to replicate, are sometimes attributed to lost techniques. But for those who believe the old stories, they are the handiwork of giants, whose strength made such feats trivial. Skeptics argue that humans are capable of ingenuity beyond expectation, and indeed we are. Yet the alignment of myths with artifacts remains haunting. Why do so many traditions insist that structures too large were the work of larger beings? In the collective memory of the Americas, giants are not abstract but concrete, with names, descriptions, and fates. They fought wars, built monuments, and died in caves. Their presence is remembered not with reverence alone, but with fear, a fear that echoes the biblical view of Nephilim as violent and corrupting. And yet, some stories also describe them as wise, as teachers of skills unknown to their neighbors. This duality, teacher and tyrant, mirrors the paradox of the Anunnaki themselves, who in Sumerian myth gave laws and knowledge, yet demanded labor and loyalty. The possibility that descendants of these beings roamed the Americas suggests a global presence, a reach far greater than we imagine. If true, then the story of humanity is not local, but planetary, intertwined with others whose origin lies beyond. The caves of Lovelock, the myths of the Paiute, the chronicles of Spanish conquistadors, the legends of Andean giants, the memories of Polynesian long ears, all are threads in a tapestry that stretches back to the same root. To dismiss them is easy, but to listen is to recognize that humanity's story is larger than we admit. And when we stand before the colossal stones of Tiwanaku or the silent faces of Easter Island, the question returns unbidden. Who really built these? And with what hands? Perhaps the answer lies not in lost technology alone, but in lost beings, whose presence lingers in bones, in blood, and in story. If giants once walked across continents, then their legacy may still be here, waiting in shadows and ruins, waiting in the very veins of people who never knew their ancestry. Across the world, scattered like markers on a forgotten map, rise structures that defy both scale and explanation. From the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the pyramids of Egypt, from the stepped temples of Mesoamerica to the stone faces of Easter Island, humanity has raised monuments that point to the sky with such uncanny similarity that one wonders if they are all chapters of a single story. The ziggurat of Ur, massive and layered, was not simply a temple, but a bridge, an attempt to connect heaven and earth. Its terraced levels symbolized ascent, each platform a step closer to the realm of the gods. In Egypt, the pyramids of Giza rose with mathematical precision, their angles aligned with the stars, their massive stones placed with a skill still debated today. In Central America, the Maya and Aztec built temples that echoed the same form, staircases leading upward, platforms at the summit where rituals were performed. To walk among these structures is to feel the pull of a shared idea, to ascend, to meet what dwells above. Were these designs independently imagined, or do they reveal a common instruction whispered into human minds by teachers who once came from the heavens? Scholars explain the similarity through convergent evolution of culture, different peoples solving the same architectural problems in similar ways. Yet the resonance is deeper than utility. The alignments with constellations, the precise measurements, the repetition of sacred geometry suggest not only parallel invention, but shared inheritance. It is as though humanity remembered a template, a vision imprinted in collective memory. The monuments themselves become testimony, carved not in clay or text, but in stone, speaking silently across continents. Then there are the statues, colossal figures hewn from rock. In the valley of Bamiyan, in Afghanistan, before their destruction, two enormous Buddhas stood for over a millennium, guardians of a pass between worlds. On Easter Island, the Moai gaze outward, their faces stern, their backs to the island, as if watching something beyond the horizon. In Egypt, the Sphinx crouches with lion's body and human head, eyes fixed eastward. In the Andes, figures carved in stone depict beings with unusual features, large heads and staring eyes, as though meant to preserve the likeness of something not quite human. Why this obsession with size, with raising forms that tower over ordinary life? Perhaps it was not only reverence, but memory. If the Anunnaki or their descendants once walked among humans as giants, then monumental art may be less symbolic than documentary, an attempt to capture in stone the beings who stood taller than men. To those who lived alongside them, carving a massive figure may have seemed the only way to reflect their presence. Even in cultures separated by oceans, we see the same impulse: build big, reach upward, create forms that echo beings from the sky. The logic of coincidence falters when confronted with so much repetition. Consider the alignment of the Great Pyramid with Orion's belt, mirrored by Teotihuacan in Mexico, or the way solstices and equinoxes are marked precisely by shadows on temple steps. Such sophistication suggests a shared science, one taught rather than discovered. And again, the myths confirm it. In Sumer, Enki gave wisdom and design. In Egypt, Thoth taught geometry and writing. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl instructed in astronomy and law. The stories differ, the names change, but the role is the same. A figure from beyond brings knowledge, and monuments are raised to honor and remember. Some researchers argue that the very act of building these structures was part of the lesson. By aligning stone with star, by shaping earth into sacred forms, humans learned to connect heaven and earth not only spiritually, but physically. The monuments thus become classrooms of stone, reminders of a curriculum taught in the dawn of civilization. Yet beneath the grandeur lies mystery. How were stones weighing dozens or hundreds of tons moved without modern machines? Ropes and manpower may explain some, but not all. In Baalbek, Lebanon, the trilithon stones weigh over 800 tons each, resting precisely in place. In Puma Punku, Bolivia, blocks are cut with such sharp angles and drill-like holes that even steel tools today would struggle. Mainstream explanations stumble, while myths offer clarity. Giants, gods, or star beings helped. Perhaps both are true. Humans built, but not alone. To walk among these ruins today is to feel the weight of forgotten instruction. The ziggurats crumble, the pyramids weather, the statues erode, yet their message endures. We were not alone when we raised the first monuments. We were guided, watched, perhaps commanded, and the shapes we built, whether stairways to the heavens or faces staring skyward, were not only symbols but signals. They declare to the sky and to future ages that humanity once knew more, once touched the stars through the hands of those who came down. These structures are not scattered coincidences. They are a global chorus. Each speaks in the same language, stone pointing upward, stone remembering giants, stone recording the moment when heaven and earth mingled. To ignore the resonance is to close our eyes to the possibility that civilization is older, stranger, and more connected than we admit. The monuments remain, silent but insistent, guardians of a truth carved not in words but in the bones of the earth itself. If the monuments of stone are the visible inheritance of the Anunnaki, then the bloodlines of rulers may be the invisible inheritance, guarded far more carefully. Across history, royal families have been obsessed with ancestry, tracing lineages back not only through centuries but, in their own claims, to gods themselves. In Sumer, the kings were called sons of Anu. In Egypt, the pharaoh was the embodiment of Horus, son of Osiris, descended from Ra, the sun god. In Japan, the emperors spoke of their descent from Amaterasu, the radiant goddess of the sun. And in China, dynasties ruled under the mandate of heaven, a concept suggesting a direct tether to the divine. These traditions are not isolated. They reflect a global pattern in which power is justified not by conquest alone, but by blood, by a heritage thought to be celestial. In Europe, the practice became almost mathematical. Dynasties intermarried until kings and queens across the continent shared common ancestors. The Habsburgs of Austria and Spain, notorious for their insistence on preserving their line, produced generations of rulers whose features betrayed the price of inbreeding. Yet the instinct to keep the bloodline pure overrode all caution. It was not only politics, but something deeper, the belief that to dilute the blood was to lose what set them apart. The phrase blue blood entered common language, first applied to the Castilian nobility of Spain. Their pale skin, contrasted with the darker complexions of commoners, revealed veins that appeared bluish beneath the surface. But for those who seek patterns in myth and biology, the phrase is more than metaphor. It suggests a literal difference, a distinction carried in blood itself, preserved deliberately across centuries. In Britain, genealogies of the royal family reach back to Trojan princes and beyond, tracing myth as much as history. Medieval chroniclers linked them to figures from the Bible, weaving ancestry that tied the crown to both divine and ancient roots. In France, the Merovingian kings were said to carry sacred blood, descendants of a line chosen by heaven. Secret societies later spun tales of their survival, suggesting that royal bloodlines were guarded even after thrones fell. Across Asia, similar claims endure. In India, certain dynasties trace lineage to the solar or lunar races of myth, families believed to originate from celestial beings. In Tibet, rulers were often regarded as incarnations of deities, while in Southeast Asia, kingship was tied to Nagas, serpentine beings associated with both water and power. Everywhere, rulers claimed not merely human ancestry, but divine essence. If these were only metaphors, they would not have been guarded so fiercely. The careful preservation of bloodlines, the resistance to mixing outside the circle, the elaborate genealogies carved into stone and preserved in scrolls, these are signs of more than pride. They are signs of fear of losing what was not human, fear of letting the spark of the Anunnaki fade. Consider the coronation rituals that survive even now. In Britain, the monarch is anointed with oil in a ceremony echoing biblical kings, as though consecration preserves the sacred. In Japan, the emperor undergoes a secret rite in which he communes with Amaterasu, renewing the claim of descent. In Africa, the Shilluk kings of Sudan were believed to embody Nikang, their mythical ancestor, not symbolically, but in continuity. These rituals are remnants of a worldview that sees rulership not as political office, but as genetic destiny. Modern science allows us to map genomes, to trace ancestry with swabs and machines. Yet even in this rational age, the fixation on bloodlines persists, from aristocratic marriages to the fascination with royal babies. The instinct to preserve the line, to ensure continuity, echoes the ancient compulsion of the Sumerian kings. And within that instinct lies the possibility that the elites of our world are not merely preserving tradition, but guarding a genetic inheritance that stretches back to the Anunnaki. If our negative blood is indeed a marker of that inheritance, its concentration in European nobility is telling. Studies show it appears disproportionately among aristocratic families, aligning with the very lines that intermarried for centuries. Coincidence, perhaps, or confirmation. The persistence of dynasties, their ability to retain influence across centuries despite wars and revolutions, has always puzzled historians. Perhaps the answer is not only political cunning, but something deeper. The magnetism of blood that carries within it the memory of gods. When we watch parades of royalty, when crowns are placed on heads under ancient rituals, we may be watching not only ceremony, but the continuation of a story that began in Sumer. The Anunnaki may no longer walk openly, but their descendants stand on balconies, wave to crowds, and sign decrees. They are human, yes, but perhaps not entirely. And if that is so, then power in our world is not simply inherited wealth or privilege. It is the survival of a bloodline whose roots reach into the stars. In the modern world, the language of clay tablets has been replaced by the language of nucleotides, the spiraling letters of DNA. Where scribes once pressed signs into wet clay, scientists now map genomes, reading the code of life written in 4 chemical bases. And just as ancient texts spoke of creation in clay, modern biology speaks of creation in molecules. Within each cell lies a record older than kings, older than pyramids, stretching back millions of years. Yet even here, in the precision of science, mysteries remain that echo the old myths. Human DNA is 99% identical across individuals, yet the small differences tell the story of migration, adaptation, and survival. But some differences puzzle researchers, as though they do not quite fit the expected pattern of evolution. Among these are unusual insertions, sequences that appear suddenly in our ancestry rather than gradually. Scientists call them endogenous retroviruses, fragments of viral code embedded in our genome, but to those who see through the lens of myth, they are markers of intervention, signs that something foreign entered our blueprint long ago. The so-called junk DNA, long thought useless, is another puzzle. Vast stretches of our genome do not code for proteins, their function obscure. For decades, they were dismissed as evolutionary leftovers, the genetic equivalent of broken tablets. But recent discoveries suggest these regions regulate complex processes, turning genes on and off, shaping development in ways we barely understand. What if this non-coding DNA is not junk at all, but the operating system of a design we did not create? The parallel with Sumerian myths is striking. Humans shaped from clay, guided by divine wisdom, tested through failures until a final model succeeded. In modern terms, trial and error in genetic engineering. To believers in the Anunnaki theory, the presence of sudden changes, of inexplicable sequences, is evidence that humanity did not rise entirely by natural selection. Instead, our genome bears the fingerprints of those who altered it. Scientists, cautious by nature, resist such leaps. They prefer explanations grounded in known processes. Yet even they admit gaps. The sudden appearance of Homo sapiens, with larger brains and complex language, remains one of evolution's great mysteries. Archaeological layers show earlier hominids persisting for hundreds of thousands of years. Then, almost abruptly, a species with art, ritual, and civilization emerges. To some, this is a leap too great to explain without intervention. Genetics has also revealed curious traits that feel almost mythic. Unusual resistance to disease in certain populations, extraordinary endurance among Tibetan highlanders living in oxygen-thin air, the unique adaptations of Arctic peoples to cold, all these are celebrated as marvels of evolution. Yet the question lingers. Why do some traits appear so suddenly, so specifically, as if tailored? If the Anunnaki truly shaped us, then such traits might not be random but intentional, designed for survival in diverse environments. And then there is the puzzle of blood. Rh-negative remains a riddle, but it is not alone. Blood types themselves, A, B, O, show distributions that do not align neatly with migration maps. Some populations carry high concentrations unexplained by known history. Could these too be legacies of ancient tinkering? Modern technology now allows us to edit genomes with tools like CRISPR, inserting or removing traits. We stand at the threshold of becoming what the Sumerians once said the gods already were, creators of life shaped in laboratories. It is sobering to think that our experiments mirror myths thousands of years old, as though we are rediscovering secrets once taught and then lost. If so, then we are not only heirs of the Anunnaki, but apprentices repeating their work. The deeper we probe the genome, the more mysterious it becomes. Geneticists have found sections of human DNA that do not appear in the genomes of other primates, unique insertions that make us distinct. Some suggest they are the key to our language, our abstract thought, our creativity. But where did they come from? If evolution is gradual, such sudden insertions feel like intrusions. And if intrusions, by whom? These questions blur the line between science and myth, between laboratory and legend. Imagine a scientist peering through a microscope, decoding a strand of DNA, and realizing that the sequence before them may not be entirely of this world. In that moment, the clay tablets of Sumer, the myths of gods, the legends of giants collapse into the double helix, all telling the same story in different scripts. For skeptics, this is speculation, yet even they cannot deny the uncanny fit. Ancient myths describe creation by gods mixing their essence with clay. Modern science describes hybridization, gene editing, and mysterious sequences. The parallels are too neat to dismiss entirely. Perhaps the Anunnaki are not only myth, but memory, encoded not in stone, but in our very cells. To consider this is to face an unsettling possibility that our bodies are archives of interventions we did not choose, that our DNA is not wholly our own. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought may be the continuation of an ancient experiment. And if so, then perhaps the question is not whether the Anunnaki still walk among us, but whether they ever truly left, for their presence lingers in every cell of our being. If blood carries the hidden essence of the Anunnaki, and stone preserves their monuments, then symbols are the language through which they may have continued to speak across centuries. From the earliest carvings on clay seals to the gilded rituals of modern religion, humanity has been surrounded by patterns that repeat too precisely to be dismissed as accident. Take, for example, the winged disc carved above temple gates in Mesopotamia. It depicts a circle with wings, sometimes with a figure standing at its center. Scholars call it a symbol of divinity, of the god Ashur or Shamash, but its presence across cultures raises deeper questions. In Egypt, the winged sun appears over temple entrances. In Persia, the Faravahar shows a winged disc with a human figure, echoing the same form. Even in later traditions, wings around a central orb survive as angelic motifs. Could this be more than decoration? To those who look for continuity, it is the mark of something remembered. Beings who descended from the sky, their craft or presence represented as a winged disc. The Sumerians may have drawn what they saw, and the symbol endured, carried into empires that followed. Rituals themselves often preserve what words forget. In ancient Mesopotamia, priests poured libations before ziggurats, offering food and drink to gods, as if nourishing physical beings. In Egypt, offerings of bread, beer, and meat were placed before statues, not as metaphors, but as meals. If gods were imagined as distant and ethereal, why feed them? But if they once walked among men, flesh and blood, then food and drink make sense. Later religions spiritualized the act, but the origin may lie in literal presence. Consider also the serpent, coiled and watching, a figure both revered and feared across the world. In Sumerian texts, Enki is associated with water, wisdom, and serpents. In the Bible, the serpent appears in Eden, offering knowledge. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl is the feathered serpent, bringer of law and calendar. In Asia, Nagas guard treasures and temples. Everywhere, the serpent is linked to knowledge, power, and often rebellion. For David Icke, it became proof of reptilian lineage. For myth itself, it is memory. Knowledge came from beings likened to serpents, not because they were snakes, but because their essence was alien, winding, transformative. The symbol carries more than allegory. It carries ancestry. Religious architecture repeats the theme of ascent. Spires of cathedrals stretch skyward, echoing ziggurats and pyramids. Minarets call voices to heaven. Stupas rise in domes that mimic cosmic mountains. The pattern is the same. Build upward, reach for the sky, as though to call back those who once descended. Even the ritual of coronation, found in cultures from Europe to Asia, preserves hidden echoes. Kings are anointed with oil, crowned under canopies, presented as chosen by divine mandate. In Sumer, kingship was literally lowered from heaven. In the Bible, Saul and David were anointed with oil by prophets. In medieval Europe, monarchs were consecrated in churches with holy oils believed to carry heavenly essence. The ritual is a chain unbroken. Rulers are not simply elected or victorious. They are infused with a spark connecting them to gods. And if those gods were the Anunnaki, then the ritual is remembrance disguised as sanctity. Symbols also appear in numbers. The number 12 recurs across calendars and myths. 12 months, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 Olympian gods, 12 signs of the zodiac. In Sumerian tradition, there were 12 major Anunnaki, children of Anu and Kai. Was the number adopted because of practicality, or because humanity was taught it by beings who counted their own counsel in 12s? Even today, the persistence of 12 in systems of time and measurement feels less like coincidence and more like inheritance. Hidden within religions are also stories of ascension and return. In Christianity, Christ ascends to heaven promising to return. In Islam, the Mahdi is awaited, a leader who will appear in the last days. In Buddhism, Maitreya will come as a future Buddha. In Hinduism, Kalki will descend at the end of the age. Different names, different traditions, but the same structure. Beings come from beyond, teach or judge, then depart, promising to come again. To read them through the lens of the Anunnaki is to see a pattern. Humanity waiting for the return of those who once walked among us. Even in secular symbols, echoes persist. The eye within the pyramid on American currency, the use of winged emblems in military insignia, the presence of serpents wrapped around staffs in medical symbols, all repeat ancient motifs. We accept them as tradition, but their roots reach deep, tangled in myths of gods, giants, and hybrids. Perhaps they endure because they are not inventions, but memories. To live among symbols is to live among whispers. They shape our buildings, our ceremonies, our flags, our prayers. They remind us, consciously or not, that something once stood beside us, and if we begin to trace them carefully, we may see that they form not a random scattering, but a map, guiding us back to an origin we half remember and half deny. The Anunnaki may not speak openly, but their language remains carved in stone, sung in ritual, hidden in number and shape. Our world is a palimpsest, layered with their signs, waiting for those willing to read. If the monuments of stone are the visible scars of an ancient presence, and the symbols in temples and scriptures are the echoes of forgotten teachers, then the secret societies of history may be the vaults where memory was deliberately guarded. Across the centuries, organizations cloaked in ritual and mystery have risen within empires, claiming knowledge hidden from ordinary eyes. The Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the Knights Templar, each is said to preserve fragments of a wisdom too dangerous or too sacred to release. Their architecture, ceremonies, and emblems are saturated with the same motifs we have traced back to Sumer. compasses and squares measuring sacred geometry, eyes radiating light, serpents coiled around staffs, suns and stars guiding initiates. To walk through a Masonic lodge is to walk among echoes of ziggurats, each symbol layered with meaning, each ritual an enactment of a memory too old to name. The Knights Templar, born in the Crusades, guarded secrets they claimed were discovered beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple. Some whisper that what they found were not relics of faith, but remnants of knowledge left by beings who had walked the earth before. The secrecy with which they protected their treasure, the rapid power they amassed, and their sudden suppression have fueled centuries of speculation. Was it gold they hoarded, or the truth of bloodlines that tied kings to heaven? The Rosicrucians, emerging in early modern Europe, spoke in manifestos of hidden wisdom from the East, guarded by a brotherhood invisible to the world. Their symbols, roses blooming upon crosses, stars and orbs, mirror ancient motifs of transformation and descent from the sky. Whether myth or invention, their influence shaped alchemy, science, and the very idea of enlightenment, as if channeling a deeper current of inheritance. Even in more familiar settings, the pattern persists. Consider the Vatican, with its obelisks brought from Egypt standing in Christian squares, its basilicas aligned with solstices, its rituals echoing older ceremonies. Some argue this is mere appropriation. Others see it as continuation, a deliberate weaving of Anunnaki memory into the fabric of a new faith. The all-seeing eye atop the unfinished pyramid on American currency is another emblem of secrecy. To most, it is a symbol of providence, but its roots reach back to Mesopotamia, to Egypt, to the Faravahar of Persia. Its placement on money, the lifeblood of modern society, suggests power hidden within daily life. If rulers once guarded bloodlines, now elites guard symbols, embedding them in architecture, currency, and ritual as silent reminders of a heritage only they fully grasp. Secrecy itself is the strongest clue. Why should power veil itself in oaths, degrees, and passwords? Why should organizations trace lineage through rituals guarded so tightly? Perhaps because what they preserve is not invention, but inheritance, not allegory, but ancestry. If the Anunnaki seeded humanity and mingled with us, their descendants may have built not only dynasties, but orders, structures designed to remember and protect. Within these lodges and halls, the story may have been told without interruption. Gods descended, humans were shaped, blood was mingled, and the line must be preserved. To ordinary members, the symbols may seem abstract, moral lessons wrapped in allegory. But to the inner circle, perhaps they are reminders of a truth that cannot be spoken aloud. Imagine a candle-lit chamber, symbols carved into walls, oaths sworn upon ancient texts. The initiate may believe he is learning secrets of virtue, but the elders smile, knowing he is being inducted into a chain that stretches back not centuries, but millennia. Even rebellion against such secrecy reflects its power. Conspiracy theories flourish because the human mind senses there is something hidden, some pattern beneath politics and ritual. Whether it is the Illuminati, the Bilderberg Group, or nameless elites, the suspicion persists that decisions are not made in parliaments alone, but in secret rooms guided by symbols older than nations. Skeptics dismiss this as paranoia, yet the persistence of the suspicion is itself revealing. Why do we so instinctively feel that power hides? Because it always has. From Sumerian kings claiming descent from Anu, to pharaohs guarding divine lineage, to medieval nobles marrying within narrow circles, the pattern is unbroken. And today, when we see the same families return to power again and again, when we see the same emblems above doorways and on seals, perhaps we are glimpsing the continuation of the same story. The Anunnaki may no longer walk among us openly, but their blood and memory endure. They are preserved not only in DNA, but in ritual, not only in families, but in fraternities. And those who guard them ensure that even when the story is forgotten by the masses, it is never forgotten entirely. To trace these symbols is to follow breadcrumbs left across centuries, leading us back to a truth that has always been hidden in plain sight. The eye that watches, the serpent that coils, the winged disk that soars, these are not random decorations. They are reminders, subtle and insistent, that humanity was shaped by hands not our own, and that some among us still remember. If the Anunnaki bloodlines survived through kings, priests, and secret orders, then the next step in their legacy is control not through temples alone, but through the very systems that govern human life. Empires rose and fell, but the thread of power stitched itself into the fabric of global control, economy, war, and story. To look at history through this lens is to see not random chaos, but careful management, as though humanity has been shepherded toward outcomes that serve the interests of an unseen hand. Start with money, the lifeblood of society. The Sumerians gave us the first tokens of trade, clay tablets recording debts and exchanges. From there, currency evolved into coins stamped with divine faces, into notes bearing symbols of eyes and pyramids. The power to issue currency is the power to rule. Empires that controlled minting controlled armies and harvests. In the modern world, central banks rise like temples of finance, their decisions affecting billions. Conspiracy theories whisper that these banks are not mere institutions, but instruments of ancient bloodlines, families who understand that wealth is energy, and to control it is to control destiny. War is the second pillar of control. Throughout history, dynasties maintained dominance not just by inheritance, but by orchestrating conflict. The Sumerian king list speaks of rulers appointed by heaven, each replacing another in cycles of destruction and renewal. Later, pharaohs expanded through campaigns, emperors through conquests. The same families that funded one army funded its enemy, ensuring that whichever side fell, their lineage remained intact. In the modern era, the pattern continues. Industrialists profiting from both sides of world wars, corporations supplying weapons that fuel endless conflict. The suspicion is that war is not failure, but design, a mechanism to reset populations, redraw maps, and consolidate control. Media and story form the third pillar. To shape what people believe is to shape their reality. Ancient myths were not bedtime tales, but systems of orientation, guiding societies toward obedience. Priests and scribes were the keepers of narrative. Today, screens replace tablets, but the role is the same. Those who control networks of communication shape perception. Narratives of fear, progress, and identity are broadcast daily. If Anunnaki descendants still guide humanity, they do so by crafting the stories we live by, ensuring that we remain within a cage of ideas we rarely question. The idea of a global elite is often dismissed as paranoia, yet certain families appear again and again. From Sumerian priest kings to European dynasties, from banking houses to corporate empires, The names shift, but the pattern holds. Power is inherited, consolidated, hidden behind institutions. Democracies rise, revolutions burn, but somehow the wealth and symbols remain in the same hands. The suspicion deepens when we see coordination across nations. Policies echo one another. Wars erupt in convenient cycles. Economic crashes strike in rhythms that transfer wealth upward. It feels less like coincidence and more like choreography. The structure resembles a pyramid. At the base, billions struggle for survival, unaware of the layers above. Mid-level managers, politicians, generals, and executives believe they steer nations, but they too are replaceable pieces. At the summit, unseen, sit the families or bloodlines who trace descent to ancient origins. Whether literally or symbolically, they embody the inheritance of the Anunnaki. And above even them, perhaps, remains the memory of the gods themselves, waiting. Evidence of this control surfaces in documents like the Sumerian king list, in myths of divine mandate, in the persistence of ritual. Even in our own era, events that appear spontaneous often reveal hidden coordination. Wars beginning on auspicious dates, treaties signed under celestial alignments, corporations adopting ancient symbols in their logos. Why do these patterns persist? Because memory is being preserved, power maintained in ways most of us cannot see. To entertain this possibility is to reconsider history itself. What if revolutions were not eruptions of freedom, but carefully guided changes of management? What if empires fell not from weakness, but because it was time to reset the stage? What if our entire progression, from clay tablets to digital networks, has been nudged along by hands unseen, ensuring that humanity moves in directions useful to its shepherds? The Anunnaki may not appear in the open anymore, but their influence would not need to. A bloodline hidden within human elites, rituals encoded in secret societies, and control exercised through money, war, and story would be enough to keep their design alive. To see history through this lens is unsettling, yet strangely clarifying. The chaos of wars, the mystery of repeated symbols, the persistence of dynasties. It all begins to look like continuity, a single thread woven through the fabric of millennia. Whether you believe the Anunnaki were flesh and blood visitors, or archetypes of power encoded in myth, the result is the same. A global system shaped to benefit a hidden few, reaching back to origins we have almost forgotten. And when we look around today, at the corporations whose influence eclipses governments, at the wars fought without end, at the stories repeated across every screen, we may ask ourselves, whose design are we truly living? If the global systems of money, war, and media are the visible skeleton of hidden control, then religion may be its heartbeat. From the very beginning, human beings sought to explain the heavens through stories of gods descending to earth. The Sumerians carved tales of Anu and Enlil, beings who shaped humanity. Centuries later, Hebrew scribes would write of Elohim, a word often translated simply as God. But in Hebrew, its form is plural, hinting not at one, but at many. Could these texts be different masks for the same memory? When Genesis speaks of the Nephilim, giants upon the earth, born of the union between the sons of God and the daughters of men, the echo of Sumer resounds. The Anunnaki, descending from the sky, mingling their essence with humans, creating lineages of power. This is the same pattern retold in another tongue. The Book of Enoch, once revered but later excluded from the biblical canon, describes the Watchers, angels who descended and taught humanity forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, sorcery, astrology. They were punished, but their children, giants of immense size and appetite, roamed the earth. This tale, stripped from official scripture, survives like a fossilized clue, a fragment that aligns almost perfectly with the Anunnaki narrative. Across traditions, the pattern repeats. Divine beings descend, knowledge is given, hybrid offspring emerge, and humanity is forever altered. Consider how these myths are woven into theology. The flood, whether in Gilgamesh or Genesis, is not just punishment, but reset, a way of erasing corrupted lineages. In both versions, the gods, or God, choose one human to survive, preserving a remnant while cleansing the earth. If we see this through the Anunnaki lens, it is the story of bloodline management, a deliberate pruning of humanity when hybrids grew too many or too unruly. Later traditions retain traces of this unease. In Deuteronomy and Numbers, the Israelites encounter races of giants, the Anakim, the Rephaim. These are described as descendants of the Nephilim, beings taller and stronger than ordinary men. Battles against them are framed as divine command, as though eradicating their blood was a sacred duty. Why did these texts preserve such details? Perhaps because the memory of mingling between gods and humans was too widespread to erase entirely. Even the New Testament contains shadows. The mysterious phrase, "As in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man," has been interpreted by some to mean that hybrids, or the intermingling of divine and human, will return. Prophecy becomes memory folded forward into time. Beyond Judeo-Christian texts, parallels abound. In Greek mythology, the Olympians mate with mortals, producing demigods, Hercules, Perseus, Achilles, heroes who are neither fully divine nor fully human. In India, the Mahabharata describes beings from the heavens, wielding weapons of unimaginable power, leaving behind heroes of extraordinary strength. In every culture, the line between God and man is blurred, always through union, always producing hybrids who dominate history. The question is whether these are allegories of human imagination or fragmented records of something that truly happened. If the Anunnaki shaped us, the Nephilim and their kin may be the fossilized memory of those unions. The suppression of certain texts adds weight to the suspicion. Why was the Book of Enoch excluded from the Bible? Why were references to giants often allegorized or minimized? Perhaps because admitting their literal truth would expose too much. That humanity's past is tangled with beings not of this world, that our religions are not only spiritual metaphors, but veiled histories. Consider, too, how priesthoods function. In ancient Israel, the Levites guarded the Ark of the Covenant, a mysterious object said to house divine presence and unleash devastating power. In Mesopotamia, priests mediated between gods and humans, preserving astronomical records and sacred law. In both cases, knowledge was filtered, guarded, distributed only to those deemed worthy. This is exactly how a legacy would be protected if it carried not only spiritual guidance, but biological truth. The Nephilim thus become more than myth. They are the embodiment of the great crossing, divine with human, sky with earth. Their presence in texts is like static on an ancient transmission, a signal partly lost but not erased, and their destruction, whether by flood or by holy war, may not have been mythic battles of good versus evil, but deliberate acts to control the spread of hybrid lines. Modern readers may balk at giants roaming the earth, yet archaeological rumors persist. Oversized skeletons allegedly unearthed in North America, long bones hidden in museum vaults, photographs from the early 20th century showing excavations of beings twice human height. Most are dismissed, many are lost, but the very persistence of the rumor reflects the same itch as the myths. A suspicion that the past housed beings who do not fit within the neat boxes of our textbooks. If religion has preserved their memory, it has also obscured it. What was once described as encounter with flesh and blood beings has been transmuted into metaphor, angels and demons reduced to abstractions, giants turned into symbols of moral struggle. Yet beneath the theology, the bones of a different story remain, one where gods walked among men, mingled their essence, and left behind offspring too powerful to ignore. To walk into a cathedral or read the opening of Genesis is to touch faintly the edges of that deeper story. The stained glass, the liturgy, the verses, all of them shimmer with echoes of something older, something too dangerous to speak plainly. And so religion becomes the mask, a way to worship the memory without confronting its implications. To follow this thread is to see that the story of the Anunnaki was never truly lost. It was recast, sanctified, and woven into the scriptures that shape civilizations. The gods became God, the hybrids became Nephilim, the forbidden knowledge became sin. Yet beneath the layers, the same tale persists. It is the story of descent, of mingling, of hidden inheritance, guarded by those who remember. And if prophecy is memory projected forward, then perhaps the story is not yet finished. The myths of giants preserved in ancient texts might be dismissed as allegory, were it not for the persistent appearance of similar stories in far-flung corners of the world, stories that bleed into modern times. Among the most whispered of these accounts is the tale of the Giant of Kandahar. Allegedly in 2002, during the height of the war in Afghanistan, a U.S. military unit vanished in remote mountains near Kandahar. When a second team was dispatched to investigate, they encountered something out of myth. A towering humanoid, over 3 meters tall, with flaming red hair, double rows of teeth, and eyes burning with hostility. The story tells of a battle in which the giant wielded a massive spear, killing a soldier before being brought down by concentrated gunfire. Its body, according to the tale, was transported by helicopter to a U.S. base, then shipped to undisclosed laboratories. Official reports deny the event, yet the story spread among soldiers, contractors, and eventually conspiracy circles. Why would such a tale persist if not rooted in some kernel of truth? Whether exaggeration, misunderstanding, or hidden reality, the Kandahar story aligns too neatly with the ancient pattern. Giants lurking in mountains, remnants of a lineage long thought erased. Across the ocean, another story emerges from the desert of Nevada, where the Lovelock Cave became the stage of a legend preserved by the Paiute people. They spoke of the Site-Ka, a race of red-haired giants who once warred with their ancestors. These beings were said to be taller, stronger, and cannibalistic, driving fear into the tribes until the Paiute united to trap them inside a cave, setting fire to its entrance. In the early 20th century, guano miners excavating the Lovelock Cave discovered enormous bones, sandals over 15 inches long, and unusual artifacts. Archaeologists catalogued some finds, dismissing the giant story, yet photographs and local accounts continue to suggest that not all evidence was made public. Once again, myth and archaeology brush against each other, leaving behind questions too large to ignore. Similar stories echo across continents. In South America, the chronicles of the Spanish conquistadors recount encounters with tribes of unusual size, some described as twice the height of Europeans. In Patagonia, early sailors claimed to have seen giants roaming the coasts, giving rise to the very name of the region, derived from Patagon, meaning big feet. In Africa, legends tell of races of long-limbed beings who vanished into the jungles, while in Asia, epics like the Mahabharata describe warriors of colossal stature. The details vary, but the pattern endures. Humanity remembers beings who walked taller and lived stronger than ordinary men. Skeptics argue that bones once labeled as giant are misidentified remains of large animals, mammoths mistaken for humans, or archaeological hoaxes designed for attention. Certainly, the 19th and early 20th centuries saw their share of fabricated skeletons displayed at carnivals. But the sheer consistency of the stories, red-haired giants in America, colossal warriors in Asia, bone fragments whispered about in museums, suggests something more than coincidence. If the Nephilim or their descendants survived floods and wars, perhaps they retreated to isolated mountains, caves, or deserts, where occasional encounters became the foundation of folklore. Consider the psychology of suppression. If giants were found, what would it mean for our understanding of history, religion, and human origins? Museums and universities operate under paradigms, human evolution as a steady, linear process, civilizations as products of gradual development. A discovery of bones twice human size, with anatomical anomalies, would shatter that narrative. It would force the question of hybridization, of intervention, of lineages not accounted for. And so, as some argue, the remains are hidden, catalogued under other names, or quietly removed from the public eye. The Kandahar tale, whether fact or myth, reveals something about our cultural moment. Soldiers, far from home, encountering a being from legend. It is almost archetypal, like a reenactment of the ancient wars described in Deuteronomy. Lovelock Cave, with its burned walls and oversized sandals, mirrors the very myths the Paiute kept alive for centuries. These are not random coincidences. They are living memories, reappearing in cycles, reminding us of a deeper layer of reality. The giants may not walk openly among us anymore, but the earth seems to whisper of their presence. Mountains hold secrets, caves cradle bones, and deserts remember footprints. Whether exaggerated folklore, suppressed archaeology, or fragments of a forgotten past, the persistence of these stories suggests that the Nephilim narrative is not dead. It is alive, lurking in shadows, waiting for discovery. To look at the world through this lens is to see hints everywhere. Photographs of oversized skeletons from the 1800s, accounts of miners stumbling upon long femurs, whispered testimonies of researchers who saw too much. The silence of officialdom is itself suspicious, as though acknowledging such beings would be too destabilizing. And perhaps that is the ultimate connection. From Sumerian tablets to biblical verses to Afghan mountains, humanity has always lived alongside something larger, stranger, more powerful than ourselves. Sometimes they were worshipped as gods, sometimes feared as monsters, sometimes hunted as enemies. Their bloodlines, if they survive, may dwell quietly within us, in traits unexplained, In myths we dismiss, in anomalies we cannot fit into charts. The Kandahar giant and the Lovelock cave do not stand alone. They are part of a chorus of whispers reminding us that our story is incomplete. To ignore them is to accept the neat boxes of history as final. To entertain them is to open a door into a far stranger past, one where myth and archaeology are not enemies, but allies, fragments of the same story scattered across millennia. If myths and field accounts provide tantalizing whispers of giants, then the archives of museums and institutions form the silence that follows. For more than a century, rumors have swirled around the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., painting it as a gatekeeper of forbidden history. Newspaper clippings from the late 1800s report excavations in the American Midwest, where burial mounds revealed skeletons measuring 8, 10, even 12 feet in height. Farmers, amateur archaeologists, and local officials described massive skulls, some with double rows of teeth, unearthed in Ohio, Wisconsin, and West Virginia. Photographs accompanied a few of these stories. Others relied on testimony alone. In nearly every case, the remains were said to have been shipped to the Smithsonian for study. And in nearly every case, they vanished. The official position of the Smithsonian is clear. No giant human skeletons exist in their collections, and all such reports are either fabrications, misidentifications, or exaggerations. Yet the sheer volume of accounts makes the silence suspicious. In 2014, a widely circulated but controversial story claimed that the Supreme Court forced the Smithsonian to release documents proving it destroyed thousands of giant skeletons in the early 20th century. The story was later debunked, traced back to a satirical site, but its popularity reflected a deeper mistrust, that people already believed the institution capable of such a cover-up. Whether true or false, the persistence of the claim suggests the wound is already open. Why would such evidence be suppressed if it existed? The answer may lie in the foundations of anthropology itself. In the late 19th century, archaeology was formalizing as a science, eager to distance itself from folklore and biblical literalism. The idea that giants once roamed America aligned too closely with religious narratives of Nephilim or with speculative histories that science sought to discredit. To acknowledge such finds would risk collapsing the neat Darwinian framework being constructed. A linear ascent from primitive ancestors to modern Homo sapiens. Giants would not fit. They would imply intervention, hybridization, or an entirely different branch of humanity. They would force scholars to admit that the past is stranger and less controlled than their models allow. This tension between paradigm and anomaly explains more than silence. It explains active erasure. Bones too large are mislabeled as megafauna, filed away as mastodon or bear. Artifacts that hint at advanced technology in prehistoric layers are consigned to storage. The Lovelock cave bones are treated as curiosities, not revelations. The Kandahar tale is dismissed as rumor. By controlling what is displayed, institutions control the narrative of human history. Yet not all evidence disappears quietly. In 1871, a report in the New York Times described skeletons up to 9 feet tall discovered in a burial mound in Alabama. In 1891, the Evening News of Nevada detailed a find of skeletons measuring over 10 feet. In Wisconsin, large burial sites yielded bones described as gigantic. Are all these reports exaggerations? Perhaps. But why do they echo the same pattern? Oversized skeletons, unusual skulls, sometimes double rows of teeth, red hair. that aligns with myths preserved by native tribes. The conspiracy deepens when we consider bloodlines. Some argue that the reason these finds are hidden is not merely scientific discomfort, but fear of what they imply, that remnants of the Nephilim or Anunnaki still exist in our DNA. If skeletons proved that such beings lived well into historical times, it would demand a re-evaluation of who we are. It would also suggest that elites, royal families, priestly castes, may trace their power back to hybrid lineages, giving rise to the modern idea of blue bloods. If the narrative of control weaves through money, war, and religion, it is completed by ancestry. Protecting that narrative means burying anything that threatens it. Consider, too, the psychology of empire. In the 19th century, America was asserting its identity, expanding westward, appropriating the land and myths of native peoples. The discovery of giants would complicate this identity, forcing recognition of an older, more mysterious inheritance. Better to erase the bones, to build museums that display neat timelines, than to open the door to stories that unsettle. The question remains, is the Smithsonian suppressing evidence, or are we projecting suspicion onto absence? Perhaps both. A locked cabinet invites speculation. A silent archive feels like conspiracy. Yet the weight of accumulated stories cannot be ignored. If even a fraction of the reports were true, then somewhere, in some vault, bones of impossible size rest in crates, hidden from the world. And perhaps this is the most haunting idea, that humanity has already found proof of giants, already touched the bones of Nephilim, and simply chosen to hide them. Not because the evidence is lacking, but because the story it tells is too dangerous. To walk into a museum hall and see a skeleton twice human height would not just fascinate, it would destabilize. It would confirm that the myths are memories, that gods walked the earth, that our species is not alone in its ancestry. It would shift power from institutions to people, from science to story, from control to chaos. And so silence reigns, not as ignorance, but as strategy. The Smithsonian becomes more than a museum. It becomes a keeper of the official timeline, a gatekeeper of what humanity is allowed to know about itself. The bones of giants, if they exist, are not simply remains. They are keys. Keys to unlocking a history of descent, hybridization, and forgotten power. And for those who benefit from control, the safest place for such keys is in the dark, behind locked doors, labeled as something else. The whispers of giants buried beneath the earth inevitably lead to another, more unsettling question. What if their legacy is not only in bones, but in bloodlines that still move among us? Throughout history, power has clustered within certain families, dynasties, royal houses, and elite circles whose influence stretches across centuries. Some researchers argue that this persistence is not merely social or economic, but genetic, the result of ancient interbreeding between humans and beings remembered as Nephilim or Anunnaki. The idea of blue blood itself hints at separation, a deliberate claim that rulers descend from something other, something more than ordinary men. In medieval Europe, royalty spoke of divine right, an authority granted not by people, but by birth. In ancient Mesopotamia, kings traced their lineages back to gods. Pharaohs of Egypt claimed descent from Ra or Osiris. These declarations, dismissed as myth, align disturbingly with the idea of hybrid ancestry, that certain bloodlines carry traits inherited from beings beyond humanity. The presence of the Rh negative blood factor has fueled speculation. Less than 15% of the global population possesses this trait, with higher concentrations among Basques, Berbers, and some Middle Eastern groups. If Rh negative cannot be traced easily to natural evolution, then perhaps it is a genetic marker of hybridization. Conspiracy theorists argue that this is why European royal families, especially those intermarried across centuries, guarded their bloodlines so jealously, ensuring the preservation of traits they believed linked them to divine or extraterrestrial origin. From the Habsburgs to the Windsors, the notion of unbroken lineage becomes more than politics. It becomes an inheritance of power rooted in something ancient. In the modern era, these suspicions extend to global elites, where a handful of families dominate finance, media, and governance. The Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Bushes, and other dynasties appear repeatedly in conspiracy maps, accused of orchestrating events from behind the scenes. Critics call this paranoia, yet the pattern of concentrated influence is undeniable. Fewer than 1% of humanity controls disproportionate wealth and power. What if this is not coincidence, but the continuation of ancient hierarchies? Writers like David Icke have given this theory a reptilian twist, suggesting that elites are literal shapeshifters, descendants of non-human hybrids who conceal their true forms. While this image may seem too extreme, it functions symbolically, portraying elites as fundamentally other, their interests alien to the masses they govern. Whether reptilian or simply blood-bound to forgotten ancestors, the symbolism points to estrangement. The rulers of Earth are not like us. They come from a different origin. Evidence for this view is less material than cultural. Look at the symbolism encoded in architecture and ritual. From Washington, D.C. to London, obelisks rise, pyramids crown skylines, and all-seeing eyes adorn currency. These symbols trace back to Egypt, Sumer, and Babylon, the very cultures said to be touched by gods or Anunnaki. Are these merely aesthetic choices, or are they signals of continuity, reminders to those in power of where their authority truly stems from? In secret societies like the Freemasons, lineage and initiation intertwine, suggesting a deeper preservation of knowledge. Myths of Atlantis, Thule, and Hyperborea resurface in occult traditions, linking elites to civilizations that vanished but whose bloodlines survived. The theory stretches further, that wars, revolutions, and even global financial systems are engineered not for progress, but for control, maintaining the hierarchy established thousands of years ago when divine beings ruled openly. If the Nephilim were giants of flesh, their descendants today may be giants of influence, wielding empires not through spears, but through laws, currencies, and technologies. The concept of hidden rulers resonates because it explains the persistent inequality of the world. Why does power remain in the hands of so few? Why do leaders often appear chosen, as though their ascent was predetermined? Perhaps because they inherit not only wealth, but blood, a link to something primal and forgotten. The survival of this idea across cultures suggests an instinctual recognition. In the Bible, Goliath is not just a warrior, he is a symbol of oppressive might. In myths of kings descended from gods, rulership is inseparable from ancestry. In our modern obsession with elite families and celebrity dynasties, the pattern continues: worship of those who carry the right blood. Skeptics argue this is nothing more than human tribalism, the preference for continuity and the illusion of destiny. But what if it is more? What if these instincts reflect an ancient memory that leadership was once a matter of lineage linked to beings who stood above humanity? To see the possibility is to reinterpret history. Empires rising and falling not as random cycles, but as orchestrated transitions within bloodlines that never relinquish control. The Anunnaki may not need to walk among us now. Their influence lingers through descendants, shaping politics, religion, and science. When we watch ceremonies of coronation, with crowns placed upon heads amid archaic rituals, we are witnessing not theater, but continuity, echoes of a pact made long ago. The phrase, "Welcome to the New World Order," takes on double meaning. Not only a political project, but the resurfacing of an ancient order, one whose architects were never human alone. The bloodlines of power, whether real hybrids or symbols of dominance, remind us that history may not belong to humanity as a whole. It may belong to a few who carry within them the spark, or the curse, of forgotten gods. From the baked clay of Sumerian tablets to the whispers of suppressed skeletons, our journey through the myths of Anunnaki and Nephilim circles back to a single haunting possibility: that human history is not the clean, linear ascent we are told, but a tangled story shaped by beings who walked beside us, or above us. At the dawn of writing, scribes etched tales of sky gods descending, teaching agriculture, astronomy, and kingship. These accounts were not written as metaphor, but as memory, events recorded with the same gravity as harvest tallies or temple offerings. The Sumerians called them Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens to shape destinies. Zechariah Sitchin, dismissed by mainstream scholars, revived this interpretation, claiming that a wandering planet, Nibiru, brought gods who meddled in human genetics, creating us as workers. Whether or not his translations hold, the myths align with the archaeological record's silence. Civilization appeared suddenly, fully formed, as if gifted. From there, the narrative threads into the Bible, where Nephilim, giants, offspring of gods and daughters of men, roamed the earth. They were described as men of renown, heroes and tyrants, erased by the flood, yet lingering in echoes. Their shadows stretch into Greek Titans, Norse Jötnar, and Hindu Asuras, all telling the same story of hybrids straddling the line between mortal and divine. The mounds of North America, the caves of Nevada, the mountains of Afghanistan, all harbor stories of bones too large, beings too strange, evidence too destabilizing. Again and again, institutions intervene. The remains vanish. The record cleanses itself. We are left only with newspaper clippings, oral traditions, and photographs tucked into forgotten archives. And yet, the idea refuses to die. It reemerges in conspiracy maps linking elite bloodlines to ancient gods, in the fascination with arch-negative blood, in suspicions that symbols on currency and in architecture are not decorative, but declarative. Our rulers, it is whispered, are heirs to something older than humanity, guarding knowledge and blood passed down through centuries. Perhaps these whispers are fantasy. Perhaps they are our way of grappling with inequality, projecting cosmic origins onto earthly dynasties. Yet the consistency of the pattern across cultures cannot be ignored. When myths from Sumer, Israel, Greece, and Native America align, we must ask, are they inventions or fragments of memory? If fragments, then what is forgotten? The possibility that humanity is not alone in its ancestry challenges every story we have been told. Evolution does not preclude intervention. History does not forbid manipulation. If bones of giants were found and hidden, if bloodlines were curated, then history as we know it is curated too, a narrative designed not to reveal, but to conceal. In that sense, the Anunnaki may not need to exist physically to matter. They exist as an idea, a forbidden possibility that destabilizes control. They represent the untold chapters, the pages torn from the book of humanity. To believe in them is to admit that the past is larger, stranger, and less secure than our textbooks allow. The conclusion, then, isn't closure, but opening. The stories of Sumer and the whispers of Smithsonian suppression converge in a single demand. Question the narrative. The truth may be buried in caves, in vaults, or in blood itself, but it persists. Every rumor, every myth, every unearthed jawbone is a reminder that history is not finished. It is contested ground, written and rewritten by those who hold the pen, or the bones. So we end not with certainty, but with an invitation to see myths as maps, conspiracies as signals, and suppressed evidence as silence that speaks louder than words. Perhaps giants once walked among us. Perhaps they still do, not in stature, but in power. And perhaps, as long as we are willing to ask, the story of humanity will remain unfinished, haunted by gods who refuse to leave our memory. Welcome to Deformed History.